our withdrawal with him that somebody who knew the person he was claiming to be recognized that he was an imposter. Well, nice try, guys. But we really are going to have to find the real Taliban, and we really are going to have to negotiate our withdrawal from the country with them. And the only reason you're staying there for another 4 years is to provide political cover for the British and American governments whilst they negotiate that withdrawal. That's the truth. But in those 4 years, your young men who've already paid a higher price than any other contingent in this occupation, as a proportion of the numbers you have there, you've lost more dead and wounded than anybody else, will be anything but safe. Mr. Harper says, well, they won't be in Kandahar, they'll be in the safety of Kabul. He's obviously not seen the news bulletins from Kabul over the last few months. He says that they'll be safer because they're behind barbed wire. Well, from what I can see, it takes a lot more than barbed wire to be safe from those now rising in ever greater numbers against the foreign occupation of their country. That's why the people are fighting. This deliberate conflation in the Canadian media and amongst the political class of Al-Qaeda, who are a global terrorist threat, with the Taliban and the other forces fighting the occupation of Afghanistan, is throwing sand in your eyes. The Afghans who are fighting us in this occupation have no view on the shortness of the girls' skirts in Ottawa, or the existence of lotteries, or the existence of casinos, or lap dancing clubs. They're interested in one thing only, which is to drive out the foreign occupier from their country. And any dignified people occupied by foreigners would feel exactly the same. It's just that the Afghans are really rather good at it. The British have already left 2 huge armies dead in Afghanistan in the 19th century. The Russians left scores of thousands dead in their period in Afghanistan. And we, if we stay there and continue this policy, will leave thousands of our own young men dead there also. And it's my belief that Karzai, the kleptocratic, vote-stealing mayor of downtown Kabul, his administration is not worth the blood of another single Canadian soldier. We have one legitimate demand which we must make in these negotiations. Our legitimate demand is that Afghanistan does not become a base again for this transnational terrorist phenomenon of Al-Qaeda, Bin Ladenism. That's a legitimate demand for us. It's a demand for which I myself would be prepared to fight. The problem is, those terms are available now, and they were available last year, and the year before. They were available at any time in the course of this entire war, which means, and it's a melancholy truth, that every life lost in the course of these 10 years was lost in vain. Because the one legitimate demand that we have, any government of national unity which emerges in Afghanistan after our withdrawal would have been prepared to grant. Indeed, Mullah Omar, the 6'3", one-eyed leader of the Taliban, you can see how difficult it would be to find him, he escaped on a motorbike 9 years ago, offered this before the war even began. And, by the way, Al-Qaeda are not even in Afghanistan. According to Bob Woodward, who has impeccable sources, I'm sure you know, at the heart of the American state, in his latest book, Obama's Wars, is oddly specific about this. He says there are 45 Al-Qaeda fighters left in Afghanistan. So, if there's only 45 of them, and we went there to fight them, why have we still got hundreds of thousands of soldiers with ever longer tours of duty? Especially as, and here's the rub, our presence in Afghanistan is recruiting soldiers for Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda all over the world. In Somalia, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in London, maybe in Canada, in the United States. The swamp of hatred and bitterness against us in the Muslim world, from which Bin Laden draws his strength and his recruits, is ever deepened by our continued occupation of a country in which the enemy has actually left. The unkindest cut of all, older viewers will know this, younger attendees may not. We're punishing the Afghan people now for having had, though no longer having, in their midst people that we sent to Afghanistan in the first place. This is grotesque. It is simply grotesque. Bin Laden was only in Afghanistan because Reagan and Thatcher gave him the money and the weapons and set up the political networks required to send him there on the immoral principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. And we wonder why the blood of Muslims around the world is boiling with anger and rage at double standards and at these injustices, about which two more later. I just want to be sure that I'm not leaving any misconception here. I am completely against this global Al-Qaeda mindset and network. As I said in the House of Commons, in a speech which won the last time I won the Parliamentary Debater of the Year, I said, pointing at the Tory front benches, I despise Osama bin Laden, a medieval, obscurantist savage. The difference is, I've always despised him. I despised him when you were giving him guns and money and sending him to On the eve of the Iraq War, there was a synchronized radio address. I know it's hard to stomach it, between Mrs. Tony Blair and Mrs. George W. Bush. They were making a feminist appeal for war. They asked us in this radio address, they even played some of the actuality, to remember those heartbreaking messages of farewell and love and grief left from their mobile phones on the answering machines of their families, of those doomed American women on board those airplanes on 9/11. I said at the time in Parliament, just because Afghan and Iraqi women don't have mobile telephones and their families don't have answering machines, it does not make their deaths delivered from the sky any less obscene than the deaths of those American women on board those planes. That is a truth self-evident to us, but to the powerful in the world, the owners of these dirty Canadian newspapers, the politicians in Ottawa and London and Washington, it isn't true.